What would you do if you heard a woman screaming in the wilderness and knew that wolves were closing in? The image burns in my mind even now. A man standing knee-deep in Copper Creek, rifle raised, 3 gray wolves circling like death itself. The woman's scream cuts through the mountain air, raw and desperate. The man's eyes are steel. "Not today," he whispers. Then everything goes black. But to understand that moment, we have to go back. Back to one day before, when a solitary hunter walked through mountains that had become his prison. Blue Ridge Mountains, Tennessee, October 23, 1898. Silas Thornwood moved through the forest like a shadow given form. 6'3" of lean muscle and hard purpose, wrapped in buckskin worn soft by 4 years of wandering. His beard, thick and brown as creek mud, covered a jaw that rarely softened into a smile. His hair, long enough to tie back, caught the morning light filtering through the oak and hickory. But it was his eyes that told the real story. Gray as morning mist, they carried the weight of things no man should have to see. His hands, scarred and capable, checked the trap line with practiced efficiency. 3 rabbits, enough for trade in Copper Creek, enough to buy another week of solitude. He straightened, reading the forest the way other men read newspapers. Deer tracks heading east, fox den near the ridge, weather changing soon. 4 years in these mountains, he said to no one, his voice rough from disuse. Just me, the wind, and memories I'd rather forget. He shouldered his pack and turned south, toward the creek where he'd make camp before heading to town. The forest knew him now. The animals let him pass. The trees offered their shelter. He'd become part of the wilderness, slowly forgetting what it meant to be part of the world of men. But the wilderness, it seemed, had other plans. The sound reached him first, faint, almost lost in the whisper of wind through pine. A moan, low and pained, coming from the direction of the creek. Silas froze, every sense suddenly sharp. His hand moved to the rifle slung across his back. Not an animal. Human. He moved faster, quieter, following the sound like a thread pulling him forward. The morning sun slanted through the trees, painting the forest floor in strips of gold and shadow. His boots found purchase on moss-covered rocks as he descended toward Copper Creek. The sound grew louder. A woman's voice, weak but fighting. Then he saw the blood. Drops of it on the limestone. Handprints smeared on tree bark. Scraps of fabric caught on thorns. His jaw tightened. Someone hurt. Someone running. And from the direction of the trail, someone running alone. Silas crested the final rise and looked down at the creek below. What he saw made his breath catch. A woman knelt in the shallow water, her dark hair plastered to her face with sweat, despite the autumn chill. Her dress, once probably decent, was torn and stained. But it was her belly that made everything clear. Swollen with child, and from the way she gripped the rocks, from the way her body tensed and released, that child was coming now. Then Silas saw the wolves, 3 of them, gray and lean with hunger, emerging from the tree line on the far bank. They'd caught the scent of blood. They saw vulnerability. They saw prey. The woman raised her head. Even from 50 yards, Silas could see her eyes, dark and defiant, even in her agony. Apache, he realized. The shape of her face, the way she held herself even now. She was one of the displaced people, far from home and far from help. One of the wolves stepped into the water, testing. Silas moved. He slid down the slope, rifle coming up in one smooth motion. His boots hit the creek bank as the lead wolf lunged. The crack of the rifle split the morning. The wolf dropped, dead, before it hit the water. The other two scattered, but not far. They circled, reassessing, trying to understand this new threat. Silas fired again, deliberately high. The bullet sang off a boulder near the second wolf's head. The message was clear: find easier prey. The wolves vanished into the forest like smoke. Silas splashed into the creek, his focus now entirely on the woman. She'd fallen forward onto her hands, breathing in great, gasping sobs. He reached her side, uncertain, his hands hovering. He'd delivered calves, helped birth foals when his family still lived. But a woman? "Ma'am," he said, his voice gentler than he'd used in 4 years. "I got you. You're safe now." She looked up at him with those dark eyes, and he saw something shift in them. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the beginning of hope. She tried to speak, but another contraction seized her, bowing her body. Silas made a decision. He swept one arm under her shoulders, supporting her weight as he half-carried, half-dragged her to the bank. His bedroll, already unpacked for his own camp, became her bed. His spare blanket, carefully saved for winter, went under her. He stripped off his coat despite the cold and folded it as a pillow. "Listen to me," he said, his hands moving with surprising sureness as he prepared. "I've done this before. Not with people, but the principle's the same. You're going to be fine." The woman's eyes followed him, calculating, measuring. Then she nodded once. A warrior's acceptance of an unexpected ally. The next hour blurred into a kind of timeless urgency. Silas built a fire with practiced speed. He boiled water in his tin pot. He found clean cloth in his pack, the spare shirt he'd been saving. All the while, the woman labored with a quiet strength that humbled him. She didn't scream, though he could see the pain in every line of her body. She breathed through it, her lips moving in what might have been prayer, or might have been counting. When the moment came, when the child finally slipped into the world, Silas was ready. His knife, cleaned in boiling water and flame, cut the cord. His hands, so used to death, cradled new life with unexpected tenderness. For a long moment, the child didn't cry. Silas's heart, that muscle he'd thought frozen, clenched. Not again. Not another death on his watch. He cleared the tiny nose and mouth. He rubbed the small back. "Come on, little one. Come on." Then the cry came, thin at first, then stronger, the sound of life insisting on itself. Silas looked up at the mother, and for the first time in 4 years, he smiled. "Strong lungs," he said, wrapping the baby in the cleanest cloth he had. "That's good." He placed the child in the woman's arms and stepped back, suddenly aware of how intimate this moment was, how far beyond his usual existence. The woman stared down at her son, tears cutting clean paths through the grime on her face. She touched the baby's hand, and he gripped her finger with that instinctive strength of the newborn. Silas turned away, giving them privacy, and set about making tea. His mother had taught him the herbs: raspberry leaf for bleeding, yarrow for strength, willow bark for pain. He'd never forgotten, though he'd tried to forget so much else. When he returned with the steaming cup, the woman had the baby to her breast. She looked up at him, and he saw intelligence in those eyes, a sharp awareness. "Drink," he said, keeping his voice low and steady. "You need strength." She took the cup with one hand, never letting go of her child. She sipped, winced at the bitter taste, but kept drinking. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was hoarse but clear. English, he noted, but with the rhythm of another language underneath. Silas nodded and moved to tend the fire. He wasn't good with words, never had been, but as the afternoon settled into evening, as the woman dozed with her baby safe in her arms, he found himself watching them both, protecting them both. Night fell soft and cold. Silas built up the fire and sat with his back to a boulder, rifle across his knees. He wouldn't sleep. Couldn't. The wolves might come back. Or worse. Because a woman alone, giving birth in the wilderness? She was running from something, and whatever she was running from might still be hunting. Around midnight, she woke. The baby slept on, wrapped in Silas's spare shirt and both their body heat. She looked at him across the fire, and he saw her gathering courage. "You do this often?" she asked. "Deliver babies in the woods?" Silas felt his mouth twitch, almost a smile. "First time. But I've pulled calves. Figure it's similar." She laughed, actually laughed, though it came out half sob. The sound surprised them both. Silas cleared his throat, suddenly awkward. That probably wasn't the right thing to say. "It was perfect," she said softly. Then, after a moment, "I'm Aita. Silas Thornwood." They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling between them. Silas poked at the coals, watching sparks spiral up toward the stars. "Had a sister once," he said, not quite sure why he was talking. "She'd be about your age now." "What happened?" Aita's voice was gentle. "Bad men. 4 years ago." The words came hard, but they came. "Came home and found them all dead. Ma, Pa, little Mary. She was only 14. Aita didn't offer hollow sympathy. She just nodded, understanding in the simple way of someone who'd seen her own share of loss. "I'm sorry," she said after a moment. Silas noticed her hand drift to her neck, where a small pendant hung. Turquoise, worked in the old Apache style. He felt something catch in his chest. He reached into his own shirt and pulled out a similar stone, though his was cruder, rough. "Found this 4 years back," he said. "Kept it. Seemed important." Aita's eyes widened. "Turquoise. My people believe it protects travelers." "Hasn't done much protecting," Silas said, but his voice was soft. They fell quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet now. The silence of two people who'd each walked through fire and recognized the scars in each other. As dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Silas stood and stretched. "We should move, get you somewhere safe." "Where?" Aita asked, and he heard the fear underneath the word. "Copper Creek, 2 days north. I know a woman there, Mama Ruth Jenkins. She'll help." Aita looked down at her son, then back up at Silas. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me." Silas was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was raw. "Because I couldn't save Mary. Couldn't save Ma or Pa. But maybe I can save you." He turned away, packing his gear, missing the way Aita's eyes filled with tears. When he looked back, she had wiped them away and was preparing to stand. "What's his name?" Silas asked, nodding at the baby. Aita smiled for the first time, and it transformed her tired face. "River. He was born in the water. The river brought him to life." "River," Silas repeated. "Good name. Strong." He helped Aita to her feet, noting how she swayed but refused to lean on him more than necessary. Pride. He understood that. He'd been living on nothing but pride for 4 years. They were just starting north when Silas heard it. Faint but unmistakable, the baying of hounds in the distance. Tracking dogs. Aita heard it too. She went pale, her arms tightening around River. "They're coming for me," she whispered. Silas looked at her, at the baby, at the fear naked in her eyes. Then he looked at his rifle, at the mountains he knew better than any man alive, at the tracks they'd leave heading north. "Then we better get moving," he said. But even as they started through the forest, even as Silas began laying false trails and backtracking through streams, he knew the truth. They weren't just running now. They were being hunted. 15 miles east, in a mansion that never should have existed in these mountain counties, a man stood in his study. Garrett Whitmore was handsome in the way expensive tailoring and good breeding could make a man handsome. But his eyes, pale blue and cold, told a different story. "She's still alive?" he asked the man standing before him. The tracker, nervous, nodded. "Left a blood trail heading north. Can't be more than a day ahead." Garrett turned to look out the window at the mountains that bordered his family's land. "My father's a judge. I'm running for state senate next year. Do you understand what it would mean if anyone found out I fathered a bastard with an Indian?" "Yes, sir." "Then you understand that she cannot reach any town. She cannot tell her story to anyone." Garrett's voice was calm, rational, the voice of a man discussing the weather. "She and the child must disappear. Permanently. Sir, if I might say, there's a complication. The tracker, Cutter Harlan, reports that someone helped her. A man." Garrett's hand tightened on his glass. "Who?" "Don't know yet. Mountain man, looks like. Could be one of the hermits up in the high country." "Find out who," Garrett said softly. "And eliminate him too. I don't care how many bodies it takes. This ends before it reaches civilization." The tracker left. Garrett stood alone in his study, looking at his reflection in the dark window. He'd built his whole life on a careful image. Harvard-educated, war hero, champion of progress and civilization. That image could not, would not, be destroyed by one moment of weakness with a servant girl. He picked up the speaking tube connected to the stables. "Get Cutter Harlan on the next train from Knoxville. Tell him I'm doubling his fee, and tell him I want it done quickly." Back in the mountains, Silas and Aita moved through the pre-dawn shadows. She was stronger than he'd expected, keeping pace despite having given birth less than a day ago. River slept in a sling Silas had fashioned from his shirt, warm against his chest. It felt strange, carrying new life, after so long carrying only death. They made decent time for the first few hours. Silas chose game trails, rocky ground that wouldn't hold tracks. He led them through streams, doubling back twice to confuse any pursuit. But he could see Aita flagging. Blood stained her skirt, and her breathing came harsh. "Rest," he said finally, finding a small cave hidden behind a waterfall. "Just for an hour." Aita collapsed gratefully onto the stone floor. Silas built a tiny fire, just enough for warmth, positioned so the smoke would dissipate in the mist from the falls. He handed River back to his mother and watched as she fed the baby with quiet concentration. "You don't have to tell me," Silas said after a while, "but it might help if I know what we're running from." Aita was silent for so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, still looking at her son, she began to speak. "His name is Garrett Whitmore. I worked in his family's house. He was kind at first, said beautiful things, promised me things." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "I believed him. I thought he meant it. Silas felt ice form in his gut. Whitmore? She looked up at him. You know the name? Judge Clayton Whitmore, Silas said slowly. He's the one who closed the investigation into my family's murder. Said there wasn't enough evidence to pursue it. The pieces started falling into place. The rushed investigation. The railroad company that had been trying to buy his family's land. The judge who ruled in their favor after the murders. They wanted our land, Silas said, his voice hardening. My pa wouldn't sell. Mays, it had been in the family for 3 generations. 2 weeks later, we were attacked. Judge Whitmore ruled it random robbery. Case closed. Aita watched him process this, watched the realization dawn. They're the same, she said softly. The men who want me dead are the same men who killed your family. Silas stood and walked to the cave entrance, looking out at the falling water. His hands were shaking. 4 years. 4 years of wandering, of trying to forget, of numbing himself with solitude. And now this. Now fate had dropped the very people he'd sworn to find right into his path. We're going to Copper Creek, he said finally. We're going to get you safe. And then I'm going to make them answer for all of it. Aita shifted River to her shoulder. They'll kill you. Maybe. Silas turned back to face her. But I stopped caring about dying a long time ago. Only thing that matters now is making sure you and River live. The certainty in his voice surprised them both. Something had shifted in him during that long night, during those hours of watching mother and child sleep by the fire. He'd spent 4 years running from his failure to save his family. Maybe this was his chance at redemption. They rested for another hour, then pushed on. The terrain grew rougher as they climbed higher into the mountains. Silas chose the hard paths, the ones no tracker would expect a woman who'd just given birth to manage. But Aita surprised him at every turn. She was Apache. Mountains were in her blood. By late afternoon, they'd covered nearly 10 miles. Silas found a protected hollow and called another halt. Aita was at the end of her strength, though she'd never admit it. He made her rest while he set snares and gathered wood. They'd need a proper camp tonight. As the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of amber and rose, Aita watched Silas work. He moved with efficient grace, each action purposeful, building up the fire just enough for warmth and cooking, arranging stones as a windbreak, finding a flat spot and padding it with pine boughs for her to sleep. You've lived out here a long time, she observed. 4 years? He hung his pot of water over the fire. After Mary died, after I couldn't find the men who did it, I just walked into these mountains and never came back out. What were you looking for? Silas was quiet for a moment. Peace, maybe, or punishment. I'm not sure I knew the difference anymore. And did you find it? He looked at her across the fire, at River sleeping peacefully in her arms. I thought I had. Thought I'd made peace with being alone. Then I heard you scream, and everything changed. They ate in comfortable silence. Silas had trapped a rabbit, roasted it over the fire with wild onions he'd found. Aita tore into the meat hungrily, feeding her depleted body. Color was coming back to her cheeks. Tomorrow we'll make Copper Creek, Silas said. Mama Ruth will take you in. She's good people. Won't ask questions you don't want to answer. And you? Aita asked. What will you do? Make sure no one comes after you. The simplicity of the statement belied its weight. Aita looked at this strange man who'd become her salvation, rough and weathered, more at home in the wilderness than civilization. But underneath all that, she saw something else. Goodness. Honor. The kind of man the world beat down but couldn't break. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything." Silas nodded and turned away, but not before she saw the emotion flicker across his face. He wasn't used to thanks, wasn't used to mattering to anyone. That night, Silas took first watch, as always. Aita slept with River tucked close, both of them wrapped in Silas's extra blanket. The fire burned low and steady. The forest around them was alive with night sounds, but none of them threatening. For a few hours at least, they were safe. Silas sat with his back to a tree, rifle across his lap, and allowed himself to think about what came next. Copper Creek was safety, but it was also exposure. Once they reached town, people would ask questions. The Whitmores would hear, and when they heard, they'd come with everything they had. He looked at Aita and River sleeping by the fire. 2 lives that depended on him now. The weight of it should have been crushing. Instead, it felt like the first real thing he'd carried in 4 years. "I won't let you die alone," he whispered to the sleeping woman. "That's a promise." And in that moment, Silas Thornwood found the thing he'd been searching for in 4 years of wandering. Purpose. The town doctor, Isaiah Webb, was a man who preferred horses to people. Horses did not lie. They did not pretend to be something they were not. They did not build corrupt empires on the backs of the suffering. But when Ezra Callahan kicked open his surgery door, carrying Nayland like a broken bird, Dr. Webb did not hesitate. He was 56 years old, gray-haired, thin as a rail fence, hands steady from 30 years of cutting into flesh and putting it back together. He had been a Union Army surgeon during the war, had seen young men torn apart by canister shot and grape, had learned that the human body could endure horrors that would break the spirit. "Put her down," Dr. Webb said, clearing his examination table with a sweep of his arm. Jars and instruments clattered to the floor. "Gently, man, gently." Ezra laid her on the cold leather as if she were made of glass. Nayland was drifting in and out of consciousness, her face pale against her dark hair, beads of sweat standing out on her forehead like morning dew. The back of her dress was ruined, cheap cotton soaked through with crimson. "I need to cut the dress off," Dr. Webb said, reaching for shears with hands that shook slightly. "And I am going to need whiskey, a lot of it. For her, maybe for me." Ezra did not move toward the door. He stood at the head of the table, a towering shadow in the dim lamplight. His own back was still raw, blood drying in streaks down to his belt. But he seemed unaware of his own pain. All his focus was on the woman before him. "You should not be here," Nayland mumbled. Her eyes fluttered open, glassy with shock. "They will come for you." "Let them come." It was the first time he had spoken since the square, his voice low, a rumble that seemed to come from the earth itself. Dr. Webb began cutting away the fabric. When he peeled back the last layer over her shoulder blade, even this hardened veteran of battlefield surgery hissed in a sharp breath. The whip had done terrible work. The leather had carved deep into muscle, a jagged valley across her skin that would scar badly, would ache in cold weather for the rest of her life. But she would live. She was built strong. Stronger than the porcelain dolls who pranced around town in their fancy dresses and complained about the heat. "Nayland," Dr. Webb said softly, holding up a bottle of amber liquid. "Drink this, all of it." She choked it down, coughing as fire burned her throat. Ezra reached out with one massive hand and gently wiped a drop of whiskey from her chin. That hand could snap a man's neck, could break bone, but his touch was impossibly tender. The stitching was brutal. There was no ether in Prescott, no chloroform, only whiskey and grit and the ability to endure. Dr. Webb gave Nayland a leather strap to bite down on. She screamed into it, muffled, agonizing sounds that tore at the silence of the room. Every time she screamed, Ezra flinched. This man, who had taken 20 lashes without a sound, looked like he was being torn apart by her pain. He took her hand in his. His hand completely engulfed hers. Rough, calloused, a tool of survival. But his grip was an anchor. Nayland held on like a drowning woman clinging to driftwood. It took an hour. By the end, Nayland had passed out from exhaustion, her body finally surrendering to mercy. Dr. Webb wiped his bloody hands on a rag and poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey. He drank it in one swallow. Then he looked at Ezra. She will live. She is built stronger than most, tougher than those society ladies who faint at the sight of blood. Ezra stared down at Nayland's sleeping face. The shame that usually clouded her features was gone, replaced by something peaceful, innocent. "Why did she do it?" Ezra asked. It was a genuine question. In his world, you looked out for yourself. Self-sacrifice was a quick way to die. Dr. Webb sighed, sitting heavily on a stool. "Because this town has spent 12 years telling Nayland she is worthless. Today she decided to prove them wrong by saving a man they deemed even more worthless than her." He took another drink. "And because she has a heart the size of this territory, and Prescott does not deserve her." Ezra ran a thumb over Nayland's knuckles, his touch reverent. "They hurt her to get to me." "They hurt her because they enjoy it," Dr. Webb corrected. "You were just convenient. Marcus Caldwell is a vicious little cur whose daddy owns the kennel. Judge Caldwell has been skimming off the Apache rations for 2 years, selling them to traders in Albuquerque. He needed a show today to distract folks from the fact that the reservation children are starving while he buys new land." Ezra's eyes narrowed, those gray stones turning almost black. "He uses suffering as distraction." "That is about the size of it." Ezra gently released Nayland's hand. He walked to the window and looked out at the darkening street of Prescott. The saloons were lighting up. Piano music drifted on the cold wind. It all looked so normal, so civilized. "Doctor," Ezra said, not turning around, "keep her safe tonight. If anyone comes through that door who is not me, you shoot them." Dr. Webb opened a drawer and pulled out an old Navy Colt revolver. He placed it on his desk. "Where are you going?" Ezra turned. The look on his face made the doctor shiver. It was the look of a man who had decided to stop being prey. "I need my rifle, and I need to go hunting." Night fell on Prescott like a blanket over a corpse. Ezra did not leave through the front door. He moved through shadows, silent despite his size. Years in the mountains had taught him how to become invisible, how to read the wind, how to know where eyes were looking and where they were not. He retrieved his gear from where the deputies had dumped it behind the jail. They had taken his money, taken his knife, but they had left the Sharps rifle, thinking it too heavy and clumsy for close quarters fighting. They were wrong. Ezra rode his Appaloosa 5 miles north to a hidden cache he maintained in a limestone cave. There he dressed his wounds with bear grease and pine tar. Primitive medicine, but effective. He bound his ribs tight with strips of cloth, checked his ammunition, 50 rounds for the sharps, 100 for the Colts. When he emerged from that cave 2 hours later, he was no longer just a man. He was something the Cheyenne whispered about around winter fires. He was the thing that came down from the high places when the balance was broken. He was the storm made flesh. But Ezra was not a fool. He could not attack Prescott head-on. Caldwell had 30 deputies and the town walls. Ezra needed to bleed them first, needed to take away their security, their money, their arrogance. He knew exactly where to start. According to the wagon tracks he had seen days earlier, and the hushed conversation he had overheard at Sam Wheeler's blacksmith shop, Judge Caldwell was moving stolen goods tonight. Apache ration supplies, flour, salt, dried beef, meant for starving children, being sold to traders for profit. The shipment was traveling through Black Mesa Canyon to avoid the main trail patrols. It was worth thousands of dollars, and it was moving right now. Ezra rode hard, cutting across open prairie under a cold moon. His horse was tired but willing. They reached the canyon 2 hours ahead of the wagons. Black Mesa Canyon was a narrow throat of red sandstone, shadowed even in daylight. At night, it was a place where sound echoed strangely, where the wind howled through gaps in the rock like the voices of angry spirits. Ezra dismounted. He gathered deadwood and brush. And then he did something audacious, something insane. He built a bonfire right in the center of the trail. By the time the lead wagon lumbered around the bend, lanterns swinging wildly, Ezra had a fire leaping 10 feet high, flames casting dancing shadows against the canyon walls, turning the passage into something from a fever dream. The wagon convoy ground to a halt. 3 wagons, 6 outriders, and leading them, bundled in a sheepskin coat and looking miserable, was Marcus Caldwell. His father had sent him on this run, thought it would toughen him up after his embarrassing display with the whip, make him a man, teach him responsibility. It was going to teach him something, but not what his father intended. "What in hell is this?" Marcus yelled over the wind, pulling his horse up short. "Who is there? Move that fire!" A figure stepped out from behind the flames, silhouetted against the firelight, 8 feet tall in shadow, wrapped in furs, holding a rifle that looked like it belonged to a different age, a weapon for killing buffalo, for stopping charging grizzlies, for sending a message. "It is the mountain man," one of the guards whispered, his horse dancing nervously beneath him. "It is Bear Strike." Marcus tried to sound brave. His voice cracked. "Damn it, Callahan! Get out of the road! You are a wanted man! I have 6 guns here!" Ezra said nothing. He just stood there, immovable as the stone walls around them. Then slowly he raised the Sharp's rifle. He did not aim at Marcus. He aimed past him, at the lead wagon driver. Boom! The roar of the buffalo gun was deafening in the confined space. The bullet passed so close to the driver's head that his hat flew off, punctured by a clean hole through the crown. The man yelped and dove off the wagon seat, scrambled into the rocks. The horses screamed and reared. Chaos erupted in an instant. The guards pulled their pistols, fired wildly at the figure by the fire. Bullets kicked up dirt around Ezra. One tugged at the fur of his coat. He did not move. He calmly cracked the breech of the Sharps, ejected the smoking brass casing. The metallic sound echoed like a bell of judgment. He slid a new cartridge in. The click-clack of the reload was a sound of pure terror to the men facing him. "Next one takes a leg off," Ezra called out. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the wind and the gunfire and the screaming horses. "Leave the wagons! Walk away! Live!" The guards looked at Marcus. They were hired men, loyal only to money. They were not paid enough to fight a ghost with a cannon. "Shoot him, you cowards!" Marcus screamed. But his voice was high, desperate. The guard closest to Marcus spat on the ground, holstered his gun, turned his horse around. "This is not my fight, Caldwell. Your daddy did not pay me to die in a canyon." One by one, the other 5 guards turned and rode back the way they came, leaving Marcus alone with 3 wagons full of stolen goods and a mountain man who looked like death itself. Marcus sat on his shivering horse, staring across the fire at the man he had whipped hours earlier. All the bravado drained out of him, leaving only the spoiled, frightened child beneath. Ezra walked around the fire, approaching slowly, each step deliberate. He grabbed the bridle of Marcus's horse and jerked the animal still. He looked up at the mayor's son. "Please," Marcus whispered, his teeth chattering. "My father, he will pay you, whatever you want." "Your father has nothing I want." Ezra reached up and grabbed the front of Marcus's expensive sheepskin coat, ripped him out of the saddle like a man picking an apple from a tree, threw him onto the hard-packed dirt. Marcus scrambled backward on his hands and feet. "You are going to kill me." "No." Ezra walked past him to the lead wagon. He pulled a burning brand from the bonfire, tossed it into the canvas covering of the wagon. The dry fabric caught instantly. Flames leaped into the night sky. Ezra moved down the line, torching all 3 wagons. The surveying equipment inside began to burn and melt. Brass theodolites, expensive telescopes, barrels of flour that could have fed children, all of it going up in smoke, thousands of dollars turning to ash. Ezra walked back to where Marcus was cowering in the dirt. The boy was illuminated by the inferno of his father's stolen future. His face streaked with tears. Ezra crouched down. They were eye level now. The smell of burning canvas and wood smoke filled the air. "You hurt her," Ezra said, his voice like grinding stones. "You drew her blood because you are small, and you wanted to feel big." Marcus could not speak, could only shake his head desperately. "Do you feel big now?" Marcus shook his head again. "Good." Ezra stood up. "Go back to your father. Tell him the mountain man is not gone. Tell him I am just clearing the brush before I burn down the house. Tell him Nayland sends her regards." Ezra turned his back on the sobbing man and walked away into the darkness, leaving Caldwell's fortune burning bright against the black canyon walls. The war for Prescott had begun. Snow came to the town in the night. It fell thick and silent, blanketing the mud and the blood of the previous day in pristine white. But inside Dr. Webb's surgery, the air was hot and heavy with the smell of laudanum and wood smoke. Nayland lay on her stomach, her face turned toward the frosted window. The pain in her back was a dull, throbbing beast that woke with every breath. But worse than the pain was the memory. She closed her eyes and saw the whip falling, saw the disgust in Marcus's eyes, felt the crushing weight of her own body pressing into the dirt. A shadow blocked the moonlight streaming through the window. Nayland flinched, gasping as her stitches pulled. The window sash slid up silently. Cold air rushed in. And then Ezra Callahan climbed over the sill like a phantom. He shut the window behind him and turned to her. He looked different. The wildness in his eyes had settled into something harder, colder. He smelled of smoke, not wood smoke, the acrid chemical smell of burning varnish and canvas. "You are awake," he said softly, moving to the stove to warm his hands. "You should not be here," Nayland whispered, her voice raspy. "The sheriff has men patrolling every street. They have orders to shoot on sight. They are looking for a man on a horse. They are not looking for shadows." He pulled a wooden chair to the side of her cot and sat down. The wood groaned under his massive frame. He looked at her. Really looked at her. In a way that made Nayland want to pull the sheet up over her head. She felt exposed. Hideous. A woman of her size, scarred and broken, lying before a man who looked like he was carved from the mountains themselves. "Why did you come back?" she asked, tears stinging her eyes. "Why did you not just ride for the high country? You were free." Ezra reached out. His hand hovered for a moment, then rested gently on her hair. His fingers rough, stained with soot, but his touch was incredibly light. A man does not leave his debts unpaid, and he does not leave his shield behind. "I am not a shield," Nayland said bitterly. "I am just big. I am just a fat Apache girl who got in the way." Ezra leaned forward, his face inches from hers. The intensity of his gaze stopped her breath. "Listen to me, Nayland. Up in the high country, the skinny wolves die first. The pine tree that is too thin snaps in the wind. You have weight. You have substance. That is not weakness. It is an anchor." He gestured to her bandages. "You took a blow that would have killed a smaller woman. You absorbed it. You saved my life, not by accident, but because you were strong enough to take the hit and still stand." Nayland stared at him. No one had ever spoken about her body as if it were a tool, a fortress. They only spoke of it as failure, as something to mock, to fix, to hide. "I burned his wagons," Ezra said, changing the subject, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial rumble. "Caldwell's shipment. 3 wagons full of stolen goods. It is ash in the canyon now." Nayland's eyes widened. "He will kill you. He will burn the whole town to find you. Let him try. He is bleeding money now. He will get desperate. And desperate men make mistakes." Ezra stood and moved to the small table where Dr. Webb kept supplies. He picked up a bowl of broth the doctor had left, brought it back to the bedside. "You need to eat. You need to keep your strength." He fed her. It was an intimate act, quiet, that defied the violence of their world. This mountain man, whose hands were trained to kill, carefully spooned broth for the woman who had been the town's punching bag. For the next 2 days, Ezra was a ghost. He slept in Dr. Webb's root cellar during daylight, vanished into the night when darkness fell. Meanwhile, the mayor's mansion was a scene of chaos. Marcus had returned, sobbing, smelling of smoke, with news of the destroyed shipment. Judge Caldwell smashed his imported crystal decanter against the wall. The sound of shattering glass like his breaking composure. "He is mocking us. A savage is dismantling my empire." He pointed a trembling finger at Sheriff Thorne. "You cannot even find him." "He is not human, Judge," the sheriff stammered. "My boys are scared. They say he turns into smoke. They say bullets pass through him." Superstitious nonsense. Caldwell paced his study like a caged animal. "If the town will not give him up, we squeeze the town. If the doctor is hiding him, we squeeze the doctor." He walked to his desk, unlocked a drawer, pulled out a heavy bag of gold coins, the last of his reserves. "Send a rider to Tucson," Caldwell hissed. "I want hired guns, professional killers, men who do not believe in ghost stories. Get me Frank Yates and his crew." Sheriff Thorne swallowed hard. "Yates? Judge, those men are animals." "Good. Fight fire with fire." 3 days after the whipping, Prescott felt different. The air was charged, electric, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Dr. Webb was exhausted, tending to Nayland, hiding Ezra, lying to deputies who came asking questions. It was taking its toll. "You have to leave," Webb told Ezra on the evening of the third day. "They are searching house to house. They will be here by morning." Ezra was in the cellar, cleaning his Sharps rifle. The smell of gun oil filled the small space. "If I leave, they take her. If you stay, they kill you both." Before Ezra could answer, the sound of shattering glass came from upstairs. Heavy boots stomped on floorboards. "Search the place. Turn it over." It was Sheriff Thorne's voice. Ezra grabbed his rifle, his muscles coiling like springs, ready to explode into violence. "No," Dr. Webb whispered urgently, putting a hand on Ezra's chest. "There are too many. If you start shooting from down here, they will burn the house with Nayland inside." Webb rushed up the cellar stairs, closed the trap door, threw a rug over it. Upstairs, the front door of the surgery had been kicked in. Sheriff Thorne stood there with 4 deputies. All had drawn guns. But behind them were 4 new men, strangers. They wore long dusters, low-brimmed hats. They carried Winchester repeaters and moved with the easy, deadly grace of professional killers. Frank Yates and his crew had arrived. "What is the meaning of this?" Dr. Webb demanded, standing in the hallway, trying to sound outraged instead of terrified. "Harboring a fugitive," the sheriff spat. "Where is he?" "I have not seen Callahan since the whipping. I am treating a patient." One of the hired guns pushed past the doctor, a man with a scar running through his left eyebrow. Cold eyes that had seen too much death and felt nothing about it anymore. He walked into the patient room where Nayland lay. Nayland was sitting up, clutching the sheet to her chest, terrified, but her jaw was set. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her cry. "Get up," the man said, his voice flat, bored. "She cannot move," Dr. Webb protested, rushing in. "Her stitches will tear." The man backhanded Dr. Webb without looking at him. The doctor crumpled to the floor, dazed. The hired gun grabbed Nayland by the arm, right over her wound, and yanked. Nayland screamed. It was sharp, jagged. Fresh blood bloomed on the back of her nightdress. "We are taking her to the jail," the man announced, dragging her toward the door. "Public enemy. Accomplice to arson." They hauled her out into the street. Nayland stumbled, her legs weak, her bare feet dragging in the snow. The cold bit into her skin, but the pain in her back was all-consuming. "Ezra!" She did not mean to yell it, but it ripped out of her throat. "Do not come. Run!" They threw her into a wagon, drove her down Main Street while curtains twitched in windows. The townspeople watched, hidden, afraid. They saw Nayland, the woman who had carried their flour and swept their floors, being dragged through the mud like an animal. And they did nothing. At the jail, they locked her in a cell. Not a room, a cage of iron bars in the center of the sheriff's office. Like she was something to be displayed, something less than human. Judge Caldwell walked in, looked at her with pure contempt. "Comfortable?" he sneered. Nayland said nothing, just wrapped her arms around herself and shivered. "You are going to stay here until your mountain man comes for you, and when he does, my new friends will cut him to ribbons." He turned to the hired guns. "Postmen on the roof, men in the stable across the street. If a dog barks, shoot it." The trap was set, but in the ventilation grate of Dr. Webb's cellar, Ezra Callahan had heard everything. He had heard Nayland scream. He had heard the blow that struck the doctor. He had heard them take her. He did not burst out in rage. The red mist that usually descended on men in battle did not come. Instead, a glacial calm settled over his mind. Cold, clear, precise. He waited until the heavy boots faded, until Dr. Webb groaned upstairs. Then Ezra emerged from the cellar, like death rising from the earth. He helped the doctor into a chair. Webb wiped blood from his split lip. "They took her." "I know. They have 10 men, maybe 12. 5 are professionals." "I know." Ezra walked to the window, looked at the jailhouse down the street. It was lit up like a beacon, a trap, an invitation. "You cannot attack the jail," Dr. Webb warned, his voice shaking. "It is suicide." Ezra turned, his face a mask of cold determination. "I am not going to attack the jail. I am going to turn this town against them." And for the first time since Nayland was taken, Dr. Isaiah Webb smiled. The sun was barely above the eastern ridges when they started the final push to Copper Creek. Aida moved with renewed strength, fueled by the knowledge that safety lay just ahead. River slept against Silas's chest, his tiny fist curled around the mountain man's shirt. They moved down from the high country into gentler terrain. The forest opened up, revealing cleared farmland in the valleys below. Smoke from morning fires rose into the crisp air. Civilization. After 3 days in the wilderness, it looked almost foreign to Silas. By mid-morning they crested the final ridge. Below them, nestled in a valley where 2 creeks met, lay Copper Creek. Population, maybe 300 souls. One main street lined with wooden buildings, weathered silver by mountain storms. A church steeple rose at the north end. At the south, Silas could see Ruth's Inn, its broad front porch familiar as home. "That's it?" Aida asked. After everything they'd been through, the town looked impossibly small. "Don't let the size fool you," Silas said. "Good people live here, hard-working, honest. They'll stand for what's right." They descended the ridge slowly. Silas kept watching their back trail, but saw no sign of pursuit. Maybe they'd bought enough time. Maybe Cutter Harlan had lost the trail. Or maybe the hunters were just being careful, waiting to see where their quarry would go to ground. Either way, they'd made it. Main Street was quiet at this hour. A few early risers sweeping storefronts. A wagon rolling past loaded with lumber. Eyes turned to watch the strangers walk through town. A mountain man in buckskin, a young Apache woman, and the bundle at his chest that occasionally moved and made small sounds. Silas felt their stares, but kept moving. Let them look. Let them wonder. Soon enough, everyone would know the whole story. Ruth's Inn sat at the corner of Main and Creek Road. 3 stories of solid timber with a wraparound porch. Flowers in window boxes, even this late in the season. The sign above the door read, "Ruth's Inn." Good food, clean beds, fair prices. In paint that had been touched up so many times it showed layers like tree rings. Silas climbed the steps and pushed through the door. The smell hit him first. Coffee, bacon, fresh bread. His stomach clenched with hunger. The common room was empty, except for one woman behind the counter. Mama Ruth Jenkins turned at the sound of the door, and her face split into a smile that could warm stone. "Silas Thornwood," she said, her voice carrying the rolling warmth of someone born to mountain country. "Thought you'd finally died up there in those hills." "Not yet, Mama Ruth." She came around the counter, all 5'2" and 200 pounds of her, arms already opening. Then she saw Aida and stopped. Saw the exhaustion in the young woman's eyes, the way she swayed on her feet, the bloodstains on her dress. Ruth's expression shifted instantly from welcome to fierce protection. "Child, you look like you walked through hell itself." "Close enough," Aita managed. Ruth took in the situation with one practiced glance. "Don't need to hear the story right now. You need a bath, a bed, and food. In that order." She turned to Silas. "Bring her upstairs. Third door on the left. I'll heat water." Silas guided Aita up the narrow stairs, River still secure against his chest. The room Ruth had indicated was small but clean. A bed with a real mattress, a washstand, a window overlooking the street. Aita sat on the bed and immediately started crying. Not loud sobs, just silent tears tracking down her face. The accumulated fear and exhaustion of 3 days finally breaking through. Silas stood awkwardly, unsure what to do. Comfort had never been his strength. But then River stirred and made a small sound, and Aita looked up. Silas carefully transferred the baby to her arms. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "I promise." Ruth bustled in with a copper tub and bucket after bucket of hot water. She shooed Silas out with practiced efficiency. "Go on now. Let the girl have some privacy. You can wait downstairs." In the common room, Silas found coffee waiting and a plate of food that made his mouth water. He ate mechanically, his mind already working through what came next. Garrett Whitmore would hear they'd reached town, probably already knew. Men like that had eyes everywhere. The door opened, and Marshal Tom Dalton walked in, tall and spare, with gray hair and eyes that had seen too much. He'd been Marshal of Copper Creek for 15 years, fair but cautious, a man who understood that sometimes the law and justice didn't quite line up. "Silas," he said, taking a seat across the table, "been hearing interesting things this morning. About you walking into town with an Apache woman and a baby?" "News travels fast." "Always does." Dalton's eyes were careful. "That the girl Garrett Whitmore's men have been looking for?" Silas felt his body tense. "She is. They say she stole from the Whitmore estate. Say she's got property that doesn't belong to her." "They're lying." "That's so." Dalton leaned back. "Garrett Whitmore's a respected man. His father's a judge." "They've got warrants out, Silas. Legal warrants." "Legal doesn't mean right." Dalton sighed. "No, it doesn't. But it does mean I've got a job to do." He was quiet for a moment. "I can give you 48 hours. After that, I have to follow the law, even if I don't like it." 48 hours, Silas repeated. "That's all?" "That's all I can do without losing my badge. Maybe my life." Dalton stood. "Use the time wisely." After the marshal left, Silas sat alone with his thoughts. 48 hours. Not enough time to run. Barely enough time to plan. They'd need help. They'd need witnesses. They'd need to turn this from a private matter into something public. Something the Whitmores couldn't make disappear quietly. The door to the street opened again. This time it was an old man, bent with age, but with eyes sharp as broken glass. Dr. Samuel Brennan. He'd been the town doctor for 30 years, had delivered half the children currently living in Copper Creek. "Heard you were back," Doc said, settling into a chair with a wheeze. "And that you brought someone who needs looking at." "Upstairs. Ruth's with her." Doc nodded. "Good. Ruth's got sense." He was quiet for a moment, studying Silas with those sharp old eyes. "You know who you're tangling with?" "Judge Whitmore's family, yeah." "Then you should know something else." Doc leaned forward, his voice dropping. "Your sister Mary. She didn't die right away." Silas felt the world tilt. What? She lived for about 2 hours after I got to her, long enough to tell me some things. Doc's hands were shaking. She said one of the men had a snake tattoo on his neck. Said another one called him Cutter. The name hit Silas like a physical blow. Cutter Harlan. The manhunter currently tracking Aida was the same man who'd killed his family. Why didn't you tell anyone? Silas's voice was rough. I tried. Went straight to the marshal at the time. He took it to Judge Whitmore. Doc's face twisted with old shame. Next day the judge called me to his office. Told me that if I valued my medical license, if I wanted to keep practicing, I'd forget what Mary said. Said she was delirious from blood loss. Couldn't be trusted. And you believed him? No, Doc said quietly. But I was a coward. I let fear silence me. He reached into his coat and pulled out a worn leather journal. But I kept notes. Everything Mary told me. Dates, details. It's all here. He pushed the journal across the table. Silas opened it with shaking hands. Page after page of careful notation. Mary's description of the attackers, the timeline of the assault, even sketches of the snake tattoo she'd described. Why now? Silas asked. Why give me this now? Because I'm old, because I'm tired of being afraid, and because that girl upstairs deserves better than what I gave your sister. Doc stood slowly. Use it. Make them answer for what they've done. After Doc went upstairs to examine Aida, Silas sat with the journal open before him. 4 years of questions, 4 years of searching. And here, in a few dozen pages of neat handwriting, were all the answers he'd needed. The Whitmore family had hired Cutter Harlan and his gang to kill anyone who stood in their way. His family had been in the way. Now Aida was in the way. How many others? How many deaths could be laid at their feet? Ruth came downstairs an hour later. Girl's asleep. Doc says she'll be fine, but she needs rest. That baby, though. She smiled. Strong as an ox. Healthy as they come. Thank you, Mama Ruth. Don't thank me yet. She sat down heavily. Silas, you know what you're up against. The Whitmores own half this county. They've got money, power, the law on their side. I know. Then you know you can't fight them alone. I won't be alone. Silas met her eyes. I'll have the truth, and I'll have people brave enough to speak it. Ruth studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. Then we'd better start gathering those people. That afternoon, Ruth began calling in favors. Jacob Miller, the blacksmith who'd lost his farm to the Whitmores through legal maneuvering. Sarah Chen, who ran the general store and whose husband had died in a suspicious accident after refusing to sell his land. Pastor William Hayes, who'd kept careful records of injustices he couldn't prevent but refused to forget. One by one, they came to Ruth's inn, quietly, carefully, and one by one, they told their stories. By evening, a picture had emerged. The Whitmore family had been systematically destroying anyone who stood in their way for nearly a decade, using the law when they could, using violence when they couldn't, always careful, always covered. But now, maybe, there were enough witnesses, enough evidence, enough courage. We need to make this public, Pastor Hayes said. A town meeting, at the church. Let everyone hear the truth. The Whitmores won't allow it, Sarah said. They won't have a choice. Silas looked around the room at these brave people. We'll do it tomorrow. High noon. Give everyone time to spread the word. Make it so public they can't make it disappear. Jacob nodded slowly. It's risky. They'll come for us. They're already coming, Silas said. At least this way, we meet them on our terms. As the group dispersed into the night, each carrying their piece of the plan, Silas climbed the stairs to check on Aida. He found her awake, sitting by the window with River in her arms. She looked stronger, cleaner, but the worry hadn't left her eyes. "I heard voices," she said. "Planning. We're going to tell your story, tomorrow, in front of the whole town. They'll kill us. Maybe." Silas sat on the edge of the bed. "But if we run, they'll hunt us forever. This way, we make them answer publicly. We take away their power to hide." Aita looked at her son, then back at Silas. "You'd risk everything for us?" "I already have." She reached out and took his hand. Her skin was warm, her grip strong. "Then we'll stand together, whatever comes." Outside, night had fallen over Copper Creek. Somewhere out there, Cutter Harlan and his hunters were closing in. Somewhere in his mansion, Garrett Whitmore was planning his next move. And in the county courthouse, Judge Whitmore was probably already drafting new warrants, new threats. But here, in this small room above Ruth's Inn, 3 people found something worth more than safety. They found each other. They found purpose. They found the courage to stand when it would be easier to run. Tomorrow would bring the fight. Tomorrow would test everything they'd built. But tonight, they rested. A mountain man who'd found his family. A mother who'd found her champion. And a baby who slept peacefully, unaware that his very existence had sparked a war. The stars turned overhead, cold and distant, and Copper Creek held its breath, waiting for dawn. 2 o'clock in the morning, the hour when darkness lies heaviest on the world and good people sleep deepest. Silas had never trusted that hour. His father used to say that nothing good ever happened at 2 in the morning. Tonight would prove him right. Silas woke to a sound that didn't belong. Not the creak of old timber settling, not the wind through the eaves. Something else. Something wrong. His hand found his rifle before his eyes fully opened. Then he smelled it. Smoke. He was off his bedroll in an instant, moving to the window. Orange light flickered at the edge of the building. Fire. Someone had set fire to Ruth's Inn. "Fire!" His voice rang through the building like a bell. "Everyone out! Now!" Doors flew open. Ruth appeared in her nightdress, her face pale. "Sweet mercy! The whole south wing!" Silas was already moving, taking the stairs 3 at a time. He burst into Aita's room. She was awake, clutching River, eyes wide with terror. "They're here," she whispered. "I know. Come on." He grabbed her arm and pulled her into the hallway. Smoke was already filling the stairwell, thick and black. Below, he could hear Ruth rousing the other guests, maybe 6 people total. Not many, but 6 souls depending on getting out alive. The main stairs were already impassable, flames licking up from the common room. Silas pivoted, pulling Aita toward the back of the building. There was a servant's stair, narrow and steep. It was their only chance. They made it down, choking on smoke, River crying in his mother's arms. The back door stood open, and Silas could see figures in the yard. Ruth herding people to safety. Doc Brennan helping an elderly couple. Then Silas heard the gunshot. He pushed Aita toward the door. "Go! Get to Doc's house, 2 blocks north, the blue one." "Silas! Go!" She ran, and Silas turned back into the burning building. More gunshots outside. Someone was attacking the evacuees. Cutter Harlan had come, and he'd brought his war. Silas emerged through the front door into chaos. The inn was fully ablaze now, flames reaching for the night sky. In the orange light, he could see 5 men on horseback. They wore bandanas over their faces, but Silas recognized the lead rider. The way he sat his horse, the long rifle across his saddle. Cutter Harlan. "Thornwood!" Cutter's voice carried over the roar of flames. "Send out the woman, and this ends. Keep her, and everyone burns." Silas brought his rifle up. His answer was clear. Cutter laughed and gestured to his men. They spread out, surrounding the burning building. One of them rode toward the small group of evacuees huddled near the well. Ruth stood in front of them, no weapon but her own substantial presence. "You boys best turn around," she said, her voice steady. "Copper Creek don't take kindly to night riders." The rider pulled his pistol. Silas didn't think. He fired. The shot caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him from his saddle. The other riders wheeled their horses, shocked that someone had actually fought back. More gunshots erupted from unexpected quarters. Jacob Miller appeared from his smithy across the street, shotgun blazing. The storekeeper's window shattered as Sarah Chen opened fire with a hunting rifle. In minutes, the quiet street had become a battlefield. But Silas's focus stayed on Cutter Harlan. The manhunter sat calmly on his horse, watching his ambush fall apart. Then his eyes found Silas through the smoke and flames. Recognition flared. "You," Cutter said softly. "You're the Crawford boy. I killed your family 4 years back." "I know. Nothing personal. Business." Cutter's hand moved toward his rifle. Silas was faster. His shot took Cutter's horse in the leg. The animal screamed and went down, throwing its rider. Cutter hit the ground hard but rolled, coming up with pistol drawn. They fired simultaneously. Silas felt the bullet graze his ribs, hot and tearing. His own shot caught Cutter in the thigh. Both men went down. The world became fire and pain, and the deafening roar of Ruth's Inn collapsing in on itself. Silas tried to rise, but his side was wet with blood. Across the street, Cutter was crawling toward his pistol, leaving a blood trail in the dirt. Then Marshal Dalton stepped between them, rifle raised. "Enough! Both of you, stay down!" More townspeople were flooding into the street now, armed, angry, ready to defend their home. Cutter's men saw the odds shifting and scattered into the darkness. Only Cutter remained, wounded and trapped. "Tom Dalton," Cutter gasped, "you're making a mistake. I've got warrants, legal authority." "Warrants don't give you the right to burn down my town." Dalton's voice was ice. "You're under arrest. Attempted murder, arson, assault. You can't arrest me. Judge Whitmore will have your badge. Then he can come collect it himself." Doc Brennan appeared at Silas's side, already examining the wound. "Graze. You'll live, but you need stitching." "Aita?" "Safe. Ruth got her to my house like you said." Silas sagged with relief. The fire was spreading now, threatening other buildings. But the townspeople were forming bucket brigades, fighting to contain it. They'd save most of the street. The inn itself was lost, but Ruth's life's work wouldn't take Copper Creek with it. As Doc helped Silas to his feet, he saw Ruth standing amid the ruins of her inn, tears streaming down her face. 20 years of work, gone in an hour. He limped over to her. "Mama Ruth, I'm sorry. This is my fault." She turned to him, and he expected anger. Instead, she pulled him into a fierce hug. "Hush now. Buildings can be rebuilt. People can't. Everyone got out alive, and that's what matters." "But your inn was insured. And besides," she looked around at the townspeople fighting the fire. "These folks just showed me something. They showed me what we really are when we're tested. Not cowards. Not folks who'll stand by while evil does its work." She squeezed his arm. "We're fighters, Silas Thornwood, and tomorrow we're going to prove it." By dawn, the fire was out. Ruth's inn was gone, just blackened timber and memories. But Copper Creek had survived. More than that, it had awakened. As the sun rose, people gathered in the street, not to gawk at the ruins, but to stand together. Jacob Miller, Sarah Chen, Pastor Hayes, Doc Brennan, families Silas didn't even know. 50 people, then 70, then 100. Marshall Dalton stood on the church steps, Cutter Harlan in chains beside him. The manhunter looked smaller now, stripped of his mystique. Just a man who'd chosen the wrong side. "Folks," Dalton said, his voice carrying in the morning quiet. "Last night, these men tried to burn us out, tried to kill innocent people, all because one rich man wanted to hide his shame." "That's a lie," the voice came from the edge of the crowd. Garrett Whitmore pushed through, flanked by 2 lawyers and a half-dozen hired men. He looked every inch the gentleman, pressed suit, clean-shaven, eyes full of righteous indignation. "This is all a misunderstanding," Garrett continued smoothly. "I hired these men to retrieve stolen property, nothing more. If they exceeded their authority, I apologize." "Stolen property?" Silas stepped forward, Doc's bandage white against his dark shirt. "You mean the baby? The baby you fathered and then tried to murder?" Garrett's face never changed. "I don't know what you're talking about. I never touched that woman. She's clearly mentally disturbed, making up stories to extract money." "Then explain this." Doc Brennan held up his journal. "4 years ago, you hired these same men to kill the Thornwood family. I have testimony from Mary Thornwood before she died. Descriptions, names, evidence your father suppressed." For the first time, Garrett's composure cracked. "That's a lie. My father is a judge. He wouldn't—" "Your father is corrupt." The voice came from an unexpected source. Marshall Dalton. "I've known it for years. Looked the other way because I was scared. Scared of losing my job, my home, maybe my life." He looked around at the assembled townspeople. "But I'm done being scared. I'd rather stand for what's right and lose everything than keep living like this." A murmur ran through the crowd. Agreement, support, courage spreading like wildfire. Garrett tried to regain control. "This is absurd. You have no proof, no real evidence, just the word of a wanted criminal and a disturbed woman." "Then let her speak." Aita's voice cut through the morning air. She stood on the church steps, River in her arms. She looked fragile in the morning light, young and scared, but her voice was steady. "Let everyone hear my story, then they can judge." Garrett's lawyers stepped forward, objecting, threatening legal action. But the crowd was having none of it. They pushed closer, 100 voices demanding truth. Pastor Hayes raised his hands for quiet. "We'll hold a hearing, right here, right now, in front of the whole town. Let everyone present their case. Then we'll decide together what justice looks like." It wasn't legal, it wasn't proper, but it was right. And sometimes, Silas thought, that's what mattered most. They moved into the church, packing the pews. Those who couldn't fit inside stood at the windows and doors, pressing close to hear. Aita sat at the front, Silas beside her. Garrett and his lawyers took the other side, confident in their ability to control the narrative. But they'd miscalculated, because this wasn't a courtroom where rules and procedures could be manipulated. This was a community demanding answers, and communities have long memories. Aita spoke first, told her story simply, without embellishment. The courtship, the promises, the pregnancy, the rejection, the order to disappear, running for her life, giving birth in the wilderness with only a stranger's kindness between her and death. When she finished, the church was silent. Then Garrett stood. "A touching story," he said. "But stories are not facts. This woman has no proof, no letters, no witnesses, nothing but her own accusations." "Actually," Sarah Chen stood up, "I have this." She walked to the front and handed Pastor Hayes a folded paper. He opened it, read it, and his face went pale. "It's a letter," Hayes said, "written in Garrett Whitmore's hand, dated 6 months ago. It reads, 'Meet me by the river tonight. I have something important to ask you.'" He looked up. "It's signed with your full name, Mr. Whitmore, and it's addressed to Aita." The church erupted.
Garrett's face went white, then red. "That's a forgery. I never—" "The handwriting matches the letter you sent me about the church roof repair," Hayes interrupted. "I compared them myself." More voices now, more people standing. The old farmer whose land was taken. The widow whose husband died suspiciously. The merchant forced to sell at a loss. Story after story, pattern after pattern. A decade of crimes, all pointing back to the same family. Garrett tried to leave. His hired men tried to clear a path. But the crowd wouldn't part. They stood firm, a human wall between Garrett Whitmore and escape. Marshal Dalton stepped forward. "Garrett Whitmore, you're under arrest. Conspiracy to commit murder, arson, assault." He paused. "And abandonment of a child. You can't do this. My father—" "Your father will answer too," Dalton said quietly. "I've already sent word to the state marshal. Real law is coming to Copper Creek, the kind your family can't buy."
As Garrett was led away in chains, Silas felt Aita's hand slip into his. He looked down at her, this woman who'd endured so much. She was crying, but smiling too. Relief and joy and exhaustion, all mixed together. "It's over," she whispered. "Not quite," Silas said, "but we're getting there." Outside, the sun climbed higher over Copper Creek. The ruins of Ruth's Inn still smoldered. The town bore scars from the night's violence. But something else had happened here, something stronger than fire. A community had found its courage, had stood together against power and corruption, had chosen right over easy. And in choosing that, they'd changed everything. 3 days after the fire, a carriage rolled into Copper Creek bearing the state marshal and 2 federal investigators. Word had spread fast through Tennessee's mountain counties. The Whitmore case wasn't just local gossip anymore. It was a scandal that threatened to expose corruption reaching all the way to the state capitol. Judge Clayton Whitmore arrived the same day, flanked by lawyers from Knoxville and Nashville. He came prepared for war, armed with writs and injunctions and threats of lawsuits that would bankrupt the entire town. But he came too late. The truth was already out, spreading like roots through stone. They held the formal hearing in the church again, not because it was proper, but because it was the only building large enough to hold everyone who wanted to witness justice. The pews were packed. People stood 4 deep along the walls. Children sat in the aisles. This wasn't just about Aita and Silas anymore. This was about every person who'd ever been wronged by power and money. The state marshal, a weathered man named Frank Holloway, took control immediately. He'd seen corruption before, in mining towns and railroad camps. But the Whitmore case was different, more personal, more cruel.
"Let's establish the facts," Holloway said, standing at the front of the church. "Miss Aita, would you tell your story again? For the record this time?" Aita stood, River sleeping in her arms. She'd told this story twice now, but each time it seemed to cost her. The shame of it, the violation, the fear. But this time, she spoke with a strength that surprised even herself. "I met Garrett Whitmore in the spring of 1898, she began. "I was working in his family's household, cleaning, cooking. He noticed me, started talking to me when no one else was around." She described the courtship, how careful Garrett had been, how he'd made her feel special, chosen, how he'd promised to marry her despite his family's certain objections. "He said love was more important than social standing," Aita continued. "He said we'd go west together, start fresh where no one knew us." Her voice hardened. "I believed him. I believed every word." "When did you tell him about the child?" "August. We met by the river like we always did. I thought he'd be happy." She looked down at River. "Instead, he looked at me like I was something dirty, something shameful. He said his father would never allow a scandal, that I needed to disappear." Judge Whitmore surged to his feet. "This is preposterous. My son never had relations with this woman. She's a servant with delusions of grandeur, trying to extort money from a respected family." "Then explain this." Doc Brennan stood and handed Marshal Holloway a stack of papers. "Bank records. Garrett Whitmore withdrew $5,000 the same week he claims he never saw this woman. The withdrawal slip notes it as personal emergency settlement." Garrett's lead lawyer jumped up. "That proves nothing. The money could have been for anything." "Could have been," Holloway agreed. "Except we also have the letter Sarah Chen provided, written in Garrett's hand, arranging secret meetings." He shuffled through more papers. "And we have testimony from 3 other household servants who saw them together." Repeatedly. The church buzzed with conversation. Judge Whitmore's face had gone purple with rage. His son sat perfectly still, his composure finally cracking. "Furthermore," Doc continued, "I have medical testimony. When Miss Aita first came to Copper Creek, I examined her. The child's age matches her timeline exactly, and there are certain physical characteristics." He paused. "The baby has a distinctive birthmark on his left shoulder, heart-shaped, rare, but hereditary." "Lots of people have birthmarks," one of the lawyers argued. "Including Garrett Whitmore," Doc said quietly. "I've been this family's physician for 20 years. I delivered Garrett. He has the exact same mark, same location, same shape." The silence in the church was absolute. Even Judge Whitmore seemed at a loss for words. The evidence was circumstantial, perhaps, but taken together, it painted an undeniable picture. Then Aita did something unexpected. She walked directly to where Garrett sat and placed River in his arms. Garrett froze, staring down at the baby with an expression caught between horror and fascination. "Look at him," Aita said softly. "Really look at him. He has your eyes, your chin. He's your son, Garrett. Our son. And he deserves better than this. Better than lies and violence and shame." For just a moment, something flickered across Garrett's face. Recognition. Maybe even regret. He touched River's tiny hand, and the baby gripped his finger with that instinctive infant strength. But then Judge Whitmore spoke. "Put that child down, now." Garrett blinked, and the moment passed. He handed River back to Aita, like he was returning borrowed property. The shutters came down over his eyes. Whatever humanity had briefly surfaced was gone, buried under years of his father's training. "My son made a mistake," Judge Whitmore said, rising to address the room. "I'll admit that much. But mistakes don't justify this circus, this witch hunt. My family has served this county for 3 generations. We've brought prosperity, order, law." His voice rose. "And we won't be destroyed by a hysterical servant and a washed-up mountain man with delusions of heroism." Silas stood slowly. His ribs ached with every breath, but he pushed through it. "You want to talk about law, Judge? Let's talk about the Thornwood murders." The judge's eyes narrowed. "That case was closed 4 years ago. Random robbery. Tragic, but unsolvable." "Except it wasn't random." Silas pulled out Doc's journal. "Mary Thornwood lived for 2 hours after the attack. She gave testimony, described her attackers, named one of them. Cutter Harlan, the same man you hired to kill Aita. Hearsay, the ramblings of a dying girl. Then explain why you threatened Doc Brennan to keep quiet. Why you closed the investigation after 1 day. Why you ruled in favor of the railroad company that wanted my family's land." Silas stepped closer. "You didn't just cover up a crime, Judge. You profited from it." Marshal Holloway held up a hand. "These are serious accusations, Mr. Thornwood. Do you have evidence?" "I have patterns. I have victims. I have a judge who's presided over a decade of suspicious land transfers, all benefiting the same companies, all conveniently following the deaths or disappearances of the original owners." Silas looked around the church. "How many people here have lost something to the Whitmores? Land, businesses, loved ones? Raise your hands." Slowly, hands went up. 5, 10, 20, more than half the church. Jacob Miller stood. "They took my farm, said I owed back taxes I'd already paid. Judge Whitmore ruled against me. Week later, the land was sold to a mining company. Judge sits on their board." Sarah Chen rose next. "My husband fell from a scaffold. They called it an accident, but he'd just refused to sell his store. Witnesses said they saw it wasn't an accident. All of them suddenly couldn't testify at the inquest." Story after story. A tapestry of corruption woven over years. The Whitmores had been careful, spreading out their crimes, making each one look isolated. But together, the pattern was damning. Marshal Holloway listened to it all, taking notes. His face grew grimmer with each testimony. Finally he stood. "Judge Whitmore? Garrett Whitmore. Based on the evidence presented here and the statements of multiple witnesses, I'm placing you both under arrest. You'll be transported to Knoxville to face a grand jury." "You have no authority," Judge Whitmore roared. "I'm a sitting judge. I have immunity." "Not for murder, not for conspiracy, not for corruption on this scale." Holloway gestured to his deputies. "Take them." What happened next would be talked about in Copper Creek for generations. Judge Whitmore, who'd ruled the county like a king for 20 years, tried to run. Actually ran like a common criminal. He made it to the church door before Jacob Miller stepped in front of him. "Ain't running from this," Jacob said quietly. "Not anymore. None of us are." They took the Whitmores away in chains, father and son, sitting in the back of a wagon, surrounded by armed deputies. The crowd watched in silence as the wagon rolled out of town, not celebrating, not jeering, just witnessing the end of something that had poisoned their community for too long. After they were gone, Aita sank onto the church steps, suddenly exhausted. Silas sat beside her, river between them. They didn't speak for a long time, just sat in the afternoon sun, feeling the weight of it all finally lifting. "What happens now?" Aita asked eventually. "Now?" Silas looked at the mountains in the distance, the peaks he'd called home for 4 years. "Now we figure out how to live. Really live." It wasn't proper for them to live together, not yet. But Silas visited every day, bringing whatever he could find. Wildflowers from the mountain meadows, fresh game for the pastor's table, stories to make Aita laugh. And slowly, River grew to know him. Would smile when Silas entered the room, would reach for him with tiny hands. It stirred something in Silas that he'd thought dead. Hope. Family. Future. One evening, 2 weeks after the hearing, Silas found Aita sitting on the pastor's porch, River asleep in her arms. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber. "Can I sit?" he asked. She smiled and nodded. He settled beside her, close enough to feel her warmth, but not touching. They'd been careful about that, respectful. Neither wanted to rush something that felt too important to risk. "The state prosecutor came by today," Aita said. "Said the grand jury indicted both Whitmores. Multiple counts. Said the trial will be in Knoxville next month." "Will you have to testify?" "Yes. But Marshal Holloway said he'd make sure I was protected, that they both were." She looked down at River. "I never wanted this. A trial. Public scandal. But I'm glad it's happening. Not just for me, for everyone they hurt." Silas nodded. "My father used to say that sunshine is the best disinfectant. Drag things into the light and they lose their power." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Aita spoke again, her voice soft. "What will you do after the trial? Will you go back to the mountains?" The question hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. Silas had been thinking about it for days. The mountains had been his refuge, his punishment, his home. But they'd also been his prison. "I've been talking to Jacob Miller," he said slowly, "about my family's land. Turns out the railroad company that bought it went bankrupt. The land reverted to the county, and with the Whitmores gone, the county's willing to sell it back. Building something together. A home. A life. A family." Aita's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I considered it the moment you pulled me from that river. When you delivered my son, and wrapped him in your own shirt, and looked at me like I mattered. Like we both mattered." She squeezed his hand. "Yes, Silas Thornwood, I'll build a life with you, if you'll have us." "If I'll have you?" Silas laughed, a sound rusty from disuse but genuine. "You saved me, Aita. Gave me a reason to come back from the wilderness. Gave me a family when I thought I'd lost mine forever." River chose that moment to wake, making small, hungry sounds. Aita shifted him to nurse, and Silas marveled at the simple domesticity of it. A woman feeding her child. His child now, in all the ways that mattered. Not by blood, but by choice. By love. Pastor Hayes appeared in the doorway, took one look at them, and smiled. "I take it I'll be performing a wedding soon?" "If you're willing," Silas said. "Willing? I'd be honored." Hayes stepped onto the porch. "Though I should warn you, the whole town will want to attend. You two are heroes around here. They'll want to celebrate." Aita laughed. "I don't feel like a hero. I feel like someone who got very lucky." "Luck had nothing to do with it," Hayes said firmly. "You both made choices. Hard choices. Brave choices. That's what makes heroes. Not luck. Character." A month later, the trial in Knoxville ended with convictions on all counts. Judge Whitmore received 20 years. Garrett got 15. Cutter Harlan, who'd turned state's evidence in hopes of leniency, still got 10. The Tennessee newspapers ran the story for weeks. The Whitmore scandal, they called it. A cautionary tale about power and corruption. But in Copper Creek, they called it something else. Justice. The wedding happened on a crisp November morning. Not in the church, too formal. Instead, they held it on the land that would become their home. Silas's family land, reclaimed and waiting for new memories. The whole town came, maybe 200 people standing in a meadow, watching as Pastor Hayes married a mountain man and an Apache woman under an oak tree that had stood for 100 years. Aita wore a dress that Sarah Chen had sewn, incorporating both Western and Apache designs. Silas wore new clothes, uncomfortable in anything but buckskin, but willing to try. River, now 2 months old, slept in Mama Ruth's arms, blissfully unaware of the ceremony, making him officially part of a family. When Hayes asked if Silas took Aita as his wife, he didn't hesitate. "I do. She's my family. Her and River. My purpose. My home." And when Aita was asked the same, her voice rang clear. "I do. He saved us, protected us, stood with us when he could have walked away. That's the man I choose, today and always." They kissed to cheers and applause. Doc Brennan had tears streaming down his weathered face. Jacob Miller clapped so hard his hands turned red. Even Marshall Dalton, usually so stoic, was smiling. After the ceremony, they held a celebration that lasted until sunset. Food appeared from every household. Music started up, fiddles and guitars playing mountain songs older than memory. People danced. Children ran wild. For one perfect autumn day, Copper Creek forgot its troubles and celebrated something pure and good. As the sun began to set, Silas and Aita slipped away from the crowd. They walked to the spot where his family's cabin had stood, now just a stone foundation and memories. "We'll build here," Silas said. "Something new, something ours." "Tell me about them," Aita said softly. "Your family. I want to know them." So Silas told her about his father's laugh and his mother's wisdom, about Mary's love of wildflowers and her habit of talking to animals, about evenings spent on the porch and winters huddled around the fire, about a life that had been taken too soon, but had been full of love. "They would have liked you," he said finally. "Would have loved River. Ma always wanted grandchildren." "Then we'll tell him about them," Aita promised. "He'll know his grandparents through our stories, know his Aunt Mary. They'll live on through him." As darkness fell and stars began to appear, they stood together on the land that would become their home. Behind them, the celebration continued, laughter and music drifting through the November air. Ahead of them, the future waited, uncertain, challenging, but full of possibility. They'd been through fire, through violence and betrayal and loss, but they'd survived. More than survived. They'd found each other, found justice, found hope. And sometimes, Silas thought, that's all any person can ask for. A chance to stand for what's right. A chance to build something good from the ashes of what was lost. A chance at redemption. He pulled It closer, feeling her warmth against him. River was back at the party with Mama Ruth, surrounded by people who would love and protect him. Their son, their family, their future. "Thank you," Silas whispered. "For what?" "For screaming that day by the river. For being brave enough to survive. For giving me a reason to care again." He kissed her forehead. "For everything." It smiled and took his hand. "Come on. Let's go back to the party. Our family is waiting." Our family. The words settled into Silas's heart like a benediction. Yes, he had a family again. Not the one he'd lost, but the one he'd found. The one he'd chosen. And that choice, freely made, meant everything. They walked back toward the lights and laughter, toward the community that had stood with them, toward the life they would build together. The wilderness had brought them together, but love would keep them that way. And in the end, that was the only justice that really mattered. Spring came to the Blue Ridge Mountains in 1899 with an explosion of color that seemed almost defiant. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows. Dogwood blossoms dotted the forest like snow that refused to melt. And on a hillside overlooking Copper Creek, a new cabin rose from the stone foundation of the old. Silas stood back, wiping sweat from his forehead, surveying the progress. The frame was up, solid oak and hickory. The roof would go on next week. Windows were ordered from Knoxville, real glass this time, instead of oiled paper. It would be a good home, a strong home, a home built to last. Looking good. Jacob Miller climbed the hill, carrying a load of cut lumber. Half the town had helped with the building, rotating crews every weekend. Not charity, community. The difference mattered. "Couldn't have done it without you all," Silas said. "Nonsense. You'd have managed. Just would have taken you 10 years instead of 3 months." Jacob set down his load and stretched. "Besides, after what you did for this town, building you a cabin is the least we can do." Down in the meadow, Aita sat with River on a blanket. The baby was 8 months old now, sitting up on his own, grabbing at everything within reach. She was teaching him words in Apache, mixing them with English. He'd grow up knowing both worlds, both halves of himself. Silas watched them, still marveling that this was his life now, his family. Some mornings he woke up expecting it all to be a dream. 4 years of solitude had made happiness feel unreal. But then River would cry, or Aita would touch his hand, and the reality of it would settle over him like a warm blanket. They'd been married 5 months, living in Pastor Hayes's guest room until the cabin was finished. It wasn't ideal, but it was temporary. And after everything they'd been through, temporary discomfort barely registered. The sound of a wagon on the road drew Silas's attention. A delivery, probably. They were getting shipments regularly now. Tools, furniture, seeds for the garden Aita wanted to plant. But as the wagon drew closer, Silas saw it wasn't a delivery. It was a woman driving, older, Apache, with silver threading through her black hair. She drove with the confidence of someone who'd traveled far and wasn't sure of her welcome. Aita saw the wagon too. She stood slowly, River in her arms, her body going tense. Then recognition dawned, and the color drained from her face. "Kaya," she whispered, the woman who'd turned her away. The last family Aita had known, the aunt who'd shut the door when she needed help most. Silas moved down the hill quickly, positioning himself between the wagon and his family. Protective instinct, born of 4 years in the wilderness where threats came without warning. But Aita put a hand on his arm. "It's all right," she said, though her voice shook. "That's my aunt, my mother's sister." Kaya climbed down from the wagon, moving like someone much older than her 48 years. She stood there, 20 feet away, not approaching, waiting to see if she'd be sent away the same way she'd sent Aita. The silence stretched. Silas could feel the tension radiating from Aita. Anger, hurt, but something else too. Longing. The need for family runs deep, even when that family has failed you. Finally, Kaya spoke. "Aita, I heard what happened. The trial. Everything." Her voice cracked. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" Aita's voice was sharp as broken glass. "You shut the door in my face. When I was pregnant and alone and terrified, you turned me away." I know. I could have died. River could have died. I know. Kaya took a step closer, then stopped when Aita flinched. I was scared. Scared of what people would think. Scared of losing the little I had left. After your mother died, after the displacement, I'd built this small life. This small, safe life. And I was too much a coward to risk it. So you sacrificed me instead? Yes. Kaya's eyes filled with tears. And I've regretted it every day since. Every single day. River made a sound, drawing Kaya's attention. She saw the baby for the first time, and her face crumpled. Oh, Aita, he's beautiful. He has your mother's eyes. Aita held River tighter, torn between the instinct to protect and the desire to share this joy with family. Silas stayed silent, letting her work through it. This wasn't his choice to make. Why did you come? Aita finally asked. Because I heard you married, heard you were building a home, and I realized I might never see you again if I didn't try. Kaya pulled a bundle from the wagon. I brought something. Things that belonged to your mother, your grandmother. I've been keeping them safe. She unwrapped the bundle carefully. Inside were treasures of a life lived. A turquoise necklace worked in the old style, a blanket woven with traditional patterns, a small drum, a pouch of sacred herbs, pieces of heritage that Aita thought she'd lost forever. Mama's necklace, Aita breathed, taking a step forward. She wanted you to have it, made me promise to give it to you when you had children. Kaya held it out. I broke my promise to help you. Let me keep this one at least. Aita looked at Silas. He saw the question in her eyes and nodded slightly. Forgiveness was hers to give or withhold. But he knew what his answer would be. Everyone deserved a second chance. He'd gotten his. Why shouldn't she? Aita crossed the remaining distance and took the necklace. Her fingers traced the familiar patterns, and tears started falling. I missed her so much. After she died, I felt so alone. You're not alone anymore, Kaya said softly. You have a husband, a son, a whole town that loves you. She paused. And if you'll allow it, you have me. I can't undo what I did. Can't take back my cowardice, but I can try to be better. Try to be the family you deserved all along. Aita was quiet for a long moment. Then she shifted River in her arms. This is your grandnephew. His name is River Thornwood. Kaya's face broke into a smile, even as tears streamed down. May I hold him? Aita hesitated, then carefully transferred the baby. Kaya cradled River with practiced ease, whispering to him in Apache, words of blessing, words of welcome, words connecting him to generations he'd never meet, but whose blood ran in his veins. He needs to know where he comes from, Kaya said, looking up at Aita. Both sides, Apache and whatever his father's people are. Mountain folk, Silas offered. Scots-Irish, mostly, mixed with Cherokee a few generations back. Then he's a child of the mountains twice over, Kaya smiled. He'll be strong, stubborn, probably impossible to control. Just like his parents, Silas said, and Aita laughed despite everything. They spent the afternoon together, the three adults and the baby. Kaya told stories about Aita's mother, about the old ways, about family history that had been lost in the chaos of displacement and survival. Aita listened hungrily, storing up every word. This was River's heritage, his story. She wanted him to know it all. As the sun began to set, Kaya prepared to leave.
I have a small house in Cherokee Territory, about 40 miles west. You're welcome any time. Both of you." She looked at Silas. "All three of you." "Thank you," Silas said simply. After Kaya left, Silas and Aita sat on the hillside, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and rose. River was asleep in Aita's arms, fed and content. "You did good today," Silas said. "Forgiving her, that took strength." "I didn't do it for her," Aita said quietly. "I did it for River. He deserves to know his family. All of it, even the imperfect parts." She leaned her head on Silas's shoulder. "Besides, you taught me something." "What's that?" "That people can change. That mistakes don't have to define us forever. You made mistakes, hiding in the mountains all those years. But you came back. You chose to care again. If you could change, why couldn't she?" Silas pulled her closer. "When did you get so wise?" "Probably around the time I gave birth in a river while wolves watched." She smiled. "Tends to give you perspective." The cabin was finished by June. Not large, just 4 rooms, but solid and warm and theirs. They moved in on a Saturday, with half the town helping carry furniture and supplies. Mama Ruth brought curtains she'd sewn. Doc Brennan brought medical supplies, just in case. Jacob Miller brought a horseshoe to hang over the door for luck. By evening, the house was set up. Their bed in one room, River's cradle in another. A common area with a fireplace Silas had built with his own hands. It wasn't fancy, but it was home. That first night, after everyone had left and River was asleep, Silas and Aita stood on their porch looking at the valley below. Lights twinkled in Copper Creek. Stars wheeled overhead. The world felt vast and full of possibility. "I never thought I'd have this," Aita said softly. "A home, a family, peace." "Neither did I." Silas wrapped his arms around her from behind, his chin resting on her head. "4 years ago, I thought my life was over, that I'd wander those mountains until I died, alone and forgotten." "What changed?" "You screamed. I heard, and I chose to care." He turned her to face him. "Best decision I ever made." She smiled and kissed him, soft and sweet. "Best decision I ever made was trusting you, a stranger with a rifle and a beard that needed serious trimming." "My beard is magnificent." "It's a bird's nest. A magnificent bird's nest." They laughed together, the sound carrying across the meadow. Inside, River stirred but didn't wake. Save in his cradle, surrounded by love, he slept peacefully. The years that followed were good ones. Not perfect, life never is. They struggled sometimes with money, with weather, with the simple hard work of building a life from nothing. But they did it together, and that made all the difference. River grew strong and wild, running through the mountains like he was born to them. By age 3, he could track a rabbit and identify a dozen edible plants. Aita taught him Apache stories and customs. Silas taught him to shoot and trap and read the forest. Between them, they raised a boy who belonged to 2 worlds and was comfortable in both. In the spring of 1901, Aita gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Willow, for the tree that bends but never breaks. She had Aita's dark eyes and Silas's stubborn chin, and from the moment she entered the world screaming, it was clear she'd inherited both parents' strength. River took to being a big brother with enthusiastic dedication. At 3 years old, he appointed himself Willow's protector, hovering over her cradle and reporting every tiny sound to his parents. "Mama, she moved. Papa,
She's looking at me. Did you see? She smiled." Silas would watch his son with wonder. This boy who'd been born in crisis, surrounded by violence and fear, had grown into someone joyful and confident. Proof that where you start doesn't determine where you end up. Kaya became a regular visitor, coming every few months to stay for weeks at a time. She taught River and later Willow the old songs, the old ways. Under her guidance, Aita began teaching Apache language and customs to other children in Copper Creek. The town was changing, becoming more open, more accepting. The Whitmore scandal had cracked something open, made people question old prejudices. Mama Ruth rebuilt her inn, bigger than before. She hired Aita to help manage it once the children were old enough. It gave Aita independence, her own income, her own identity beyond wife and mother. Silas supported it completely. He'd learned long ago that Aita needed purpose as much as she needed family. Doc Brennan eventually retired, passing his practice to a young doctor fresh from medical school. But before he did, he made sure every case he'd documented, every injustice he'd witnessed, was properly recorded. His journal became the foundation for reforms that swept through Tennessee's mountain counties. Corruption didn't disappear overnight, but it became harder to hide. Marshal Dalton ran for county sheriff and won. He cleaned house, firing deputies who'd been on the Whitmore payroll, hiring men who understood that the law was meant to protect everyone, not just the powerful. He became something of a legend in Tennessee, the marshal who'd stood up to a corrupt judge and lived to tell about it. As for the Whitmores, they served their sentences in silence. Judge Clayton Whitmore died in prison in 1905, unrepentant to the end. Garrett got out in 1913, broken and aged beyond his years. He left Tennessee and was never heard from again. Some said he went west. Some said he drank himself to death in a St. Louis boarding house. No one in Copper Creek cared enough to find out. The years turned. 1902 became 1903, became 1904. River started school, shocking his teacher with how much he already knew. Willow grew from baby to toddler, to a force of nature that no one could quite control. The cabin expanded, growing new rooms as the family grew. Silas sometimes climbed to his family's old cemetery on the hill, where his parents and Mary were buried. He'd tell them about River and Willow, about Aita, about the life he built from the ashes of what he'd lost. And he'd thank them for the values they'd instilled, the strength they'd modeled, the love they'd given him that made it possible to love again. One evening in the autumn of 1905, Silas sat on his porch watching the sunset. River, now 7, was teaching 5-year-old Willow how to identify birds by their calls. Aita was inside preparing dinner, singing softly in Apache. The smell of cooking meat drifted through the open door. This was his life now. Simple, domestic. Everything he'd thought he didn't want. Everything he'd run from for 4 years in the wilderness. And he'd never been happier. He thought about that October morning 7 years ago, when he'd heard a woman screaming by a river. How easily he could have walked away. How close he'd come to choosing continued isolation over the risk of caring. But he'd made a different choice. He'd chosen to act instead of hide, to care instead of protect himself, to be part of the world instead of separate from it. And that choice had given him everything. River ran up onto the porch, breathless with excitement. "Papa, did you hear the owl? It's a great horned. I saw it in the oak tree." "I heard it, son. Good ears." "Can I stay up late tonight, please? I want to watch for it." Silas ruffled his son's hair. "Ask your mother, but I'd say yes if it was up to me." River whooped and ran inside, already pleading his case. Willow followed, demanding equal treatment. Whatever River got to do, she wanted to do twice as much. Silas smiled. His children. Healthy, happy, safe. Everything he'd failed to give his first family, he was giving to this one. Aita came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "Dinner's almost ready. River wants to stay up late. Again." "He's learning. Curious about the world. That's good. He's learning to manipulate his father." But she was smiling. "You're too soft with him." "Maybe, but he's a good boy. They both are. We're doing something right." Aita sat beside him, leaning into his warmth. Yes, we are." They sat in comfortable silence, watching their children play in the yard.
The sun painted the mountains in shades of amber and rose. Smoke rose from chimneys in Copper Creek below. The world turned, indifferent to individual lives. But Silas had carved out his piece of it, his family, his home, his peace. "Do you ever regret it?" Aita asked suddenly. "Saving me that day? Everything that came after? Your quiet life in the mountains gone? You could have just walked away." Silas pulled her closer. "Not for 1 second. That life wasn't peace. It was punishment. I was existing, not living." He kissed her forehead. "You gave me life back. You and River and Willow. You're everything I need. My reason to keep going. My joy." "Good," she smiled up at him. "Because you're stuck with us now. Best prison I've ever been in." She laughed and called the children in for dinner. As they trooped inside, arguing cheerfully about who got to sit where, Silas took one last look at the mountains, the wilderness that had sheltered him, the rivers that had tested him, the forest that had hidden him when he was running from the world. He didn't run anymore, didn't hide, because he'd learned the most important lesson the wilderness could teach. Survival is nothing without something to survive for. He'd survived the loss of his first family, survived 4 years alone, survived violence and corruption and betrayal. But he'd only truly lived when he'd chosen to care again, when he'd heard a woman screaming and decided that her life mattered more than his safety. That decision had cost him his isolation, but given him everything else. A wife who challenged him, children who filled his days with joy and chaos, a community that respected him, a legacy that would outlive him. Sometimes the wilderness calls to a man, offers peace and solitude and the simplicity of survival. And sometimes a man is strong enough to answer that call and then walk back out again, bringing with him the lessons learned, but leaving behind the loneliness. Silas Thornwood had walked out. And in doing so, he'd found what he'd been searching for all along. Not peace, not punishment, not isolation or vengeance, or answers to questions that had no answers. He'd found home. And that, in the end, was worth everything. The door closed behind him, shutting out the cooling night air. Inside, his family waited. Dinner, laughter, stories by the fire. The simple, precious moments that make up a life. Before stepping inside, Silas paused on the threshold. He touched the doorframe, solid wood under his calloused palm. The turquoise stone still hung around his neck, the one Mary had clutched when she died. It had led him here, not to revenge, but to redemption. His parents would have loved this. His mother teaching Aita to make her famous stew. His father showing River how to notch timber.
Mary spoiling both children with wildflower crowns. They were gone, but they lived on in every choice he made, in the man he'd become. "Silas!"
Aita called from inside. "Are you coming, or are you planning to stand there all night?" He smiled. His family was calling him home. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Work to be done, children to raise, a community to be part of. But tonight, there was just this: his family, his home, his life. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything.